Alrighty guys, welcome back to the second episode in the CADing Your Rocket series, where today we will be going over everything necessary to design and build parts in SolidWorks. Alright, so to get started, let's go over here, jump into here, grab a new part, load up that window, and we'll start going over some of the major sketch tools and some of the major features that you're going to be using in your pretty much every day-to-day part building. Alrighty guys, so once the part window is completely loaded up, you're going to see a lot of the familiar taskbars and the design tree down here that we talked about last time in the first video. And if you do not know what I'm talking about, when I talk about the manager bar up here, the taskbar, and the design tree down here, then please refer back to the first video if you want a better understanding as to what all of these taskbars and tabs and windows essentially do and how to customize it to your liking. But for today's video right now, we're going to kind of dive down into the sketch tool and the features tool, because these are the two main things that you're going to be using when creating parts in SolidWorks. So one of the major things to understand with sketching is that you pretty much, whenever you want to sketch, you're going to have to start a sketch on either a plane, like these planes over here, which are hidden, so I'm just going to unhide them real quick. I'm just going to show them by clicking that little I button. But essentially, whenever you start a sketch, you're going to want to pick a plane and start outlining a shape on that, and then you can use extrude features to add a material, and then after that you can use other materials and other features and other sketches to take away or modify that base shape. And that's where you're going to have to kind of think about your part that you want to design and think about which plane would be the best to start from, because you want to try and optimize the amount of, or you want to optimize the way that you build these parts. You don't want to, you want to figure out if it's better to add a large amount of material and then take it away and modify it, or if it's better to start with a smaller amount of material and then add to it and then continue to modify it after that. But that's going to depend on each part and all the design you want to do and what the end result will be. But that's going to be kind of your call, and you're going to have to mess around with that and figure that out. But for the most part right now, just to get us started, I'm going to select and just start a sketch on the front plane. So to do this, you can either right-click the plane and hit Sketch. Otherwise, you can always hit Sketch, hit the plane, or you can always right-click the plane over here in the design tree and then sketch on it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and start a sketch on the front plane, and once you start a sketch essentially in the sketch tab up here, you're going to notice that this sketch tool up here now says exit sketch, and down here essentially a sketch step has opened up, and that is the current level you are on. So this is where you're going to be using these tools up here. These are your majority of your sketch tools that you're going to use. Your pretty much basic day-to-day tools, and they just pretty much make simple shapes. As you can see, you have a line feature up here, a rectangle, straight slot. These are really useful for when you're doing assemblies and manufacturing later on. Circles, pretty easy, and you can actually customize the type of circle. You got arches, and then you got polygons, you got splines, ellipses, and then you can even sketch fillets. If you know that your part in the end is going to have a fillet, instead of doing it through a feature, you can just add it straight into the sketch, which is pretty cool. Then over here is for text, if you want to add extruded or popping out text to things. But for right now, let's just kind of get started here with the line. So to use a tool, you either just click on it, and then you can start clicking on your plane. And this right now, and this is the origin that I'm kind of snapping in around. And SolidWorks is really nice because you can easily snap to different angles or along planes or even intersections and things like that, especially once you start to build up more of the model and you have more faces, sketches, edges, and things like that. You have more to snap onto and build off of. But essentially, another thing that I want to mention about the sketches is that if you notice up in the corner, or even if you press the S button, which is your sketch hotbar or toolbar, or hotkey, sorry, you get all your tools right here. So instead of having to go up here, you can just click on your tools, whichever one you want. but I wanted to draw your attention to the drop-down menu for each of these tools, because essentially each one of these represent a type of sketch you can do, and there's actually different tools that are inside of it, underneath it. And depending on what you want to do, you can click whichever one that is best for your case. So say if you wanted to make a square, probably the fastest way would be to go to a center rectangle and then make your shape, and then just assign it some dimensions, and I will show you how to use this dimension tool in a second. And then boom, now you have a square, and now you can go ahead in your features and extrude it out. Other than that, in the sketches, that is something probably that really useful, that especially if you are on the FTR project, or you're kind of designing things for the to be made out of readily available tools, or or parts, say like standard I-beams, standard square or rectangle beams, or standard C-beams. Instead of actually designing it in a sketch plane like this, you can actually go over here to your SolidWorks add-ons, hit your SolidWorks toolbox right here, and now this is going to take a little bit to load up. And this is actually a cool thing that I learned the other day from one of my friends. But essentially, when you hit toolbar, or it's toolbox, these icons show up over here. And essentially what you want to do is, if you want to design using a standard square or rectangle beam, you're going to go into here, hit structural steel. It looks like a little I-beam extruded out. And it's a tiny little icon up here. And once you click it, and if you have the right one, it drops down this menu. And you can actually pick square tube, C, L angle, M beam, all these different types of structural tubes, and then they give you all the standard sizing and thicknesses, and they even give you properties based on it. And it's cool because what you can do through here is that I gotta exit a sketch. I can't be in an open sketch and do that. But so let's go back to that I-beam button up here, and then click whichever one you want. I'm just going to create that one, and then it instantly loads in the model sketch for me, and I didn't even have to do anything. So this is extremely useful, because a lot of the times there are standard dimensions for everything, and instead of having to look it up or go on GrabCAD to find the model, you can just make it right here. And this is a really easy way, and then you can just go into the features and extrude it on later. But that was a cool little thing I just wanted to show you guys, especially if you want to use standardized parts or structural members to design things. There's just a button to do it right here, and it makes your life way easier. But alright, let's go ahead. We might as well just continue using the sketch to explain some of the features. But actually, here, let me actually jump into the smart dimension. So this is going to be a really useful tool that you're going to need. That's pretty much going to determine what all of your measurements are and segment lengths for each part. And how to use them is, you essentially just, whenever you're at smart dimension, this one's the easiest. There's a whole bunch of other types of dimension tools that you can use, but essentially smart dimension is going to be your one-stop go-to. Really easy to use, because you essentially just click on a line and it'll tell you the length of it. And if you want to find out the length between two, you just click from here to here, and then, or from one line to the next, and then it'll tell you the distance. And what's cool is, on arches too, you can find out the radius. So that's really helpful. And then if you ever want to modify a part or a value, you double click on it. Oh, it might not actually be allowing me to edit this because it's a standardized part. Interesting. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete all this. So I'm just going to quickly delete this sketch, and to do that, you go right click on your little sketch icon and hit delete. And then all these guys are going to complain, so we're just going to delete them because these dimensions are dependent on sketch entities that are no longer there, so they show up as a caution and they're failing. So whenever you see that, just means you either need to go back into your part and edit it, or just delete the dimension. But let's say front plane, let me just go ahead and draw a quick square. Doesn't matter. So now what we can do is up here in the Smart Dimension tool, we can, oh wait, no, come on, Smart Dimension. Yeah, there we go. We can, first of all, see what size it is, whatever it was sketched to, and then if you want to edit the value, you can double click on the dimension and then input whatever you want. So let's just make this a 4, and then we're going to make the same on the other side, 4. And from there, pretty much that's essentially how you use the Smart Dimension tool. And there's a few other things you can do with it, but that's, we can go over that another time and go more in depth into the because you can actually link these dimensions together to make them equal, so whenever one changes, the other changes, and you can edit, set dependencies and things like that in here in this dimension text area. It's really cool, and it's a really helpful way to be able to quickly edit and modify your parts and have them dynamically change with your changes. But that's kind of more advanced, and we'll go over that another time. But from here, we might as well use this to kind of get into the features. So once you have a sketch and in a box, or essentially an area enclosed, in an enclosed area, you're able to now extrude and make something out of this. And you can tell when things are closed is because it will have a shaded region on the inside, and when you hover, you'll see an orange boundary. If this was not completely, say, closed, where it was like that, so now you can see the drawing is not completely closed, so it's not filled in. And what I was just using right there is trim entities. So this is like imagine it as a scissors, and you can draw through lines and cut them. So if you want to quickly delete lines, you can do it that way. Otherwise, you can just hover, click on a line, and hit delete. And there's a few other things that are pretty useful. These are patterns for sketching, so if you want to make a linear pattern of your sketches. So let's, for instance, so this is your direction 1, direction 2, direction X or X-axis is your standard choice, essentially right from the beginning. It's your default, and you can delete this line and choose Y direction if you want. But essentially this changes the number of patterns, and then this changes the distance in between. So essentially, if you knew you wanted to make a say a geometric pattern of squares, you could do it this way, and then boom, instead of having to redraw everything, you can just draw one, and now all of these are linked to this one, and they are linked to whatever the features are in this sketch. So from here, I might as well go over oh, actually, before I move on, offset entities is another one you're probably going to use a lot. So what this does is it just makes a parallel line a set distance away from the rest of your, well, from your sketch, whatever you picked, and you can change the distance. Oh, come on. Let's go back. Yeah, so there you go. You can change the distance, so you can make it bigger. You can make it smaller. You can make it reverse on the inside, outside, bidirectional, both ways. And then once you click check, it just makes another box in there. So now if I wanted to, I could just extrude that line, and it essentially sets a constant thickness. So that's a really nice way to make hollowed members pretty fast. But so from here, I'm just going to delete all of these unused boxes real quick. So from here, I might as well use this to explore some of the features. So when you're ready to actually, when your sketch is done and you're ready to actually start creating a part, you just go over here into features, and probably the one you're going to use right off the bat is going to be one of these 3 boss base buttons. And essentially what these are doing is that they're adding material to your work plane. So imagine like there's nothing in front of you except just a 2D sketch, and then from there you're adding on clay or you're adding on material to your workspace that you can later modify and either change shape, take off, put holes through, chamfer, camber, all that kind of fun stuff. So from here I'm just going to go simple extrude boss. So I'm going to click that button and it's automatically going to select the sketch I was in, and if it doesn't, and say I was in a sketch and then I said exit sketch and my screen looked like this, I can always just go to sketch and then I can hit extrude base, and it'll select that sketch, and then it'll select that sketch to be extruded. So from here, this is where you can control how much material is added on, and this is where you control distance, and you can either add in this menu, or you can type it in, or you can drag this bar. Other than that, you can add a secondary direction, so you can go the other way too. Thin features, making it a tube, so instead of having to do the offset entities, you can just do it this way. But I prefer to tend to do it with the offset entities. That way I know I can change it at any given point just by going back into the sketch. But this way is pretty good too. But essentially, this is your first type of extrude, and it's known as blind, so it will essentially add material regardless of whatever is happening, regardless of whether it'll bump into another sketch or it goes through something. It just doesn't matter. It just does it. It essentially just doesn't care. It will go through anything or take away anything. Up to vertex is if you had, say, a U-shaped part or like a horseshoe, and you wanted to add an extrude up to a certain point, you can do up to vertex. And there's actually there's a bunch of different ways you can do that by using up to vertex, up to surface, offset from surface. So offset from surface, so say if you had a faceplate and you wanted to extrude something and within an inch of that, you could say go up to within an inch, and then it will set the extrude up to that point. Mid-plane is if you have two faces, essentially. So mid-plane is just, it'll extrude equally on both sides. Yeah, there you go. And then up to body is from whatever your sketch is up to whatever body you select. And it can be spherical, it can be a flat plane, it can be an angled surface, it can be anything. But for now, and a lot of the times, you're probably going to use blind, especially when starting. So let's just make a 2-foot rod, essentially. 2-foot rectangular rod. And you can type in, and what's really cool is when you extrude here, especially in blind, you can actually put math in here. So if you wanted to, you could say, if you were designing a part and you knew you needed a 3-foot long, well, essentially you kind of knew you had 15 inches of space in between two parts and you needed to add on another part, you could say, this part I need to make, my other part is 1/2 inch thick, so you can do 0.5 inch plus, and you know a few other parts, so you can do 2 inches, and you say minus the overall length, or something. You can mess around. Here, hold on, let me see. I'm just going to do 5 feet minus, yeah, and there you go. And it doesn't even need to be the same dimension type. Just make sure that you put the standardized dimension tag, so like with it. So if it was inches, you put IN, or if it was millimeter, you put MM, or meter, you put M, inch, you put IN, etc., etc. So that's cool. So that's basically going to be your primary feature you're going to use is either extrude boss base, revolve boss base. So revolve is essentially if you wanted to sweep a circle around itself, around an axis, that's how you would do it. And I'll show you guys how to do that in another video, and I'll show you how to do the swept boss base in another video. But we'll be exploring like cases. So like for this one, we'll do a nose cone, and I'll show you how to use this tool making a nose cone for a rocket. And I'll show you how to do the swept boss base for making pipes for a rocket, essentially. But essentially what happens a lot of the times is, especially right at the beginning, a lot of these buttons are going to be hidden from you because you currently don't have material in your workspace. So you will only be able to allow use these tools when you have material in your workspace, because a lot of these, especially the ones over here, they edit and modify existing material in your workspace. So like fillet, for example, makes rounded corners, and you can't do that unless you have a part too, or you have an edge too round. So like that's what fillet does, and here is up and down, increase, decrease, asymmetric, symmetric. You can change the type of the radius, whole bunch of other fillet options and setbacks, but a lot of the times you're just going to use the standard fillet, and as you can see, it now modified that corner. And then loft base, so this is again adding material, so you can draw something on top of this, go off of it, and here you can always sketch onto a surface. So now as you build up your part, you can select different faces to sketch on, and then you can use to extrude or cut more stuff off or out of. So for example, we can go ahead, I selected this face to sketch on, and now I can go over here, hit that, and now I can extrude cut this guy. And now, boom, from there, we just removed material all the way through. And to step back and kind of show you again how I did that, and I used my shortcuts because that's how I usually design, is using the S key, and I even assigned my extrude and extrude boss and extrude cut directly into the sketch menu, so then I can go directly from a sketch here, extrude cut, and cut a hole through this. So essentially what you're going to do is you can either hit blind or through all both. So essentially this will, through all just goes through everything regardless. Blind, it just goes to whatever value you set. You can hit direction, there's a direction 2, and there's a thin feature very similar to the original boss extrude. And then you also have your selected contours down here where you can actually pick and choose where and what exactly you want to cut out, because depending on what you choose, you can either have a rod or you can have a tube with a hole in it. So it just depends on what you pick, and I usually pick through all, especially if I know something's just going to go through everything. You just hit through all, and it will do exactly what it says. Or you can, if you want to be in conscious of other parts, so I say if this was a really complex part and there was another thing over here and I knew I could not go through into that, you can always go extrude cut, select your contours, and then you go to up to surface, and this is where you can select this surface, and it will not cut any farther than through that part. So as you can see, it just stops right there. Other than that, you got a lot of swept cuts, so these are things if you wanted to make some fancy kind of routing style cuts. Fillet, and in this drop down you got your chamfer, so if you wanted to make a flat edge instead, you can do it there. Shell is pretty cool, so shell is which is if you wanted to make a kind of like a basin or something. So for example, I'm going to delete that other feature, I'm going to delete the sketch just by selecting it and putting delete. But say I wanted to shell, so what it will do is it will just essentially dig out the inside to whatever thickness you want, and the default's 0.1 inch, so we're just going to go with that. But as you can see here, it shows you everywhere is now that thickness, that 0.1 inch everywhere, and the part is now hollow. And if you go up here into your view types, we can do hidden lines visible, and you can see that everywhere is that thickness, which is really cool. So that's a really easy way to make a pressure vessel or a cup or something like that. You just make the general shape and then you just shell it out. And this up here is just your view state, so you got your solid with lines, solid without lines, black and white with lines, and then hidden lines, and then this is all lines the same. Personally, I'll stick to top one, so display style of the shaded with edges, and the hidden lines visible. These are two are going to be your main useful ones. But for instance, this one's really good for making cartoon directions with. So you can make PNGs out of a picture like this and upload them into documents or PowerPoints, and easily make instructional documents with this, which is kind of cool. And over here, these are your linear patterns. So if you wanted to, again, so essentially kind of do the same thing as that sketch before, but you wanted to do it with the entire body that you just made, you can do it that way. How many are there? I don't want 11 instances. What on earth? Alright, hold on. Let's back up. Oh, here. Okay, so I wasn't up to reference because that's what I was using last time. Okay, so make sure easiest one is probably spacing in instances. So especially if you've got nothing else and you want to copy this. Hit your direction, so whichever axis you want. I want it to go along this line that way. So I'm going to hit that line. Then I'm going to go bodies because I want to copy this entire body. So I'm going to hit that. Wait, oh no, come on. Yeah, so you got to make sure to hit the check mark, then hit bodies, and then go over here. There we go. So now I don't want 11 instances. Let's just say I want 3. Oh, 3. And then spacing, we're just going to make it 5. And then hit check. And then now we got 3 of the same exact part. So this is a really easy way to go ahead and make, say, grates or things that, well, have lots of patterns. You can either use it this way or you can do circular patterns, which are up here. And essentially for this one, instead of selecting an edge, you're going to have to select a circle or a surface in order to revolve around. Other than that, reference geometry, this is pretty useful, especially if you're getting into more complex part design. You're going to want to maybe create your own plane. So say if you wanted to make something directly in the middle of this, you would hit one plane, hit the other, and you would make sure that mid-plane was selected on both, and then it makes a plane right in the middle of the two. And then now I can start a drawing right on that plane, as you can see. This is not how you're going to want to do it, by the way, but I'm just demonstrating something real quick. But then from here you can go, so this is where you would want to be using these features where you say up to surface or offset from surface. And you click a surface and then you say within 0.1. And as you can see, it's within 0.1 inches of that surface. Oh, and one last important thing I would say for parts and features. So let's back up all the way back to the original part, and we can just do that using the scroll wheel. So I'm just going to scroll back to here. What I want to do, well actually I might as well just delete these because I'm not going to go back and reuse them. So I'm just going to scroll this back down, delete, delete, delete. Now we're back. So, an important thing, if you want to make a lot of pieces with the same general geometry, but have, like, say, different instances where, say, if one part you need this exact part, but you need a hole in it here, and then another one you need to be solid, and then in another one you just need a hole on the top, we can do that through configurations. So configurations you're actually going to find right here. And I'm going to go through this again in its own video because this is actually really important, but I felt I needed to make a mention of it here. So go to your configurations. So this is essentially how you make minute differences to the same part with being in the same part file, but you can call upon them differently. It'll make more sense in an assembly standpoint, but say essentially this is your default, your first part. What you're going to want to do is right click on the part configuration, hit add configuration. You're going to say this is the whole version, and then you can add description, use and build materials. This is for later, but I'll explain what this means in another video. but let's just say for now we want to make a different part with this hole through it. So now this is where I would go into Sketch, check that, and I'm just going to go ahead and make that hole. And the more you use the software and the more you kind of are familiar with it and the better you are at using the hotkeys, the faster it will go. But now essentially what happens is now when I switch between these two configurations, one doesn't have the hole and one has the hole. And now these are essentially two different parts, but in the same part file, which is really nice. And then when you call upon them, you will be able to name that. You'll be able to choose if you want the default or if you want the whole version, or if you want any of the other types you make. And configurations is something that I use a lot because it saves you from doing the same work or saving as a whole part and then going into saving as a new part and then doing it that way. It's much faster in configurations and it's much easier in assemblies because you can switch between the parts much easier. So, and that being said, there's actually properties up here that you can use, and you can actually use these to name this part and the configurations. And so that can be found up here in this top right corner. It's File Properties. And this is where you're going to want to go to Summary. So this is where pretty much you're going to write the part information. So you're going to go your authors, your name, or whoever made the part. Keywords is if you need to call on it really quickly. Comments is just general information about the part. Title is the title of the part that you want referenced in drawings. And subject is just, well, your subject of whatever it is that you want. And comments and author will be linked into your drawings as well. So make sure to fill this out. And this is where you can actually see your different configurations, where you have your whole version and your default, and you can change configurations and if it's in the bill of materials and things like that. Pretty cool, and it helps down the road for when you're making your drawings and you want to quickly and easily, I guess, change and modify your drawing names and titles. So yeah, I mean, that kind of goes over most of the basics for SolidWorks sketches and features. But a lot of the times so just to recap, sketching, they're going to start on these three planes most of the time. You're going to be using general shapes, and you can pretty much click the lines snap to each other. You can edit dimensions, you can use relations to make sketches, and there's lots of videos out there on how to exactly do that. I'll try to explain it in other videos, but if not, or in the meantime you want to know, I'd say check it out on other videos. Yeah, and these are just your general features that you're going to be using mostly. And if you have any specific questions about any of these, most of them can be kind of answered just by using them or looking at them, like looking at the little description. And if you need more help on it, you can always ask the search command or go to the SolidWorks wikis if you need more information on each specific tool. But for the most part, you're going to learn these just by kind of using them or watching videos on how to do it. Because sometimes they require very specific inputs, which are sometimes a little less intuitive to figure out. But alright guys, I'm going to say that's it for today's video on parts and sketches. The next video that we're going to work on, or I'm going to be working on, is Introduction to Assemblies. And then after that, I'm going to be working on the introduction to the actual simulation over here. Specifically the part simulation, and then after that assembly simulations, because I know a lot of people in the FTR project are curious about this and they don't necessarily have enough information to do it. So I'm going to jump ahead, go into the simulation stuff, briefly go over some simple cases and how to use it and what the different buttons mean. But then later on I'll be going into more in depth on running complex simulations essentially on bigger assemblies to make sure no small part will break. But alright guys, I'm going to call it quits on today's video, so have a good one.